Welcome back, everyone. Marco Collective Gamers CG77 here, and it's been a little while since this last update. But for today's video, we've got a brief overview of the Super Spy for the Neo Geo AES system, one of the earlier titles released back in 1990. It's definitely more of a first-person perspective, somewhat of a beat 'em up slash shooter. There is some kind of role-playing elements to the game itself, and it's actually, progenitor to the Cross Sword series, which of course is a bit more third person because of the wireframe characters. The game itself was directed by Ikechi Kawasaki, developed and published by SNK, with designers of Akira Goto, Hideki Fujiwara, Takeshi Kimura, and composer Mazahiko Hitaya. It was released for the arcade MVS, and of course the Neo Geo AES and the Neo Geo CD. It was released in the arcades in October of 1990, and then for the home systems in July of 1991 across Japan, North America, and Europe. It did come to the Neo Geo CD in Japan in September of 1994, and then in North America in October of 1996. The gameplay itself is pretty straightforward. I mean, it is a game from 1990, so definitely, while not as deep as some of the, similar type games in the series, like, say, Cross Swords or even Dynamite Duke, I think it's a great first try, I should say, when it comes to a game, this type of game that kind of melds a first-person view with a little bit of action and shooting. Of course, the action as far as controls is pretty much left and right in regards to dodging or strafing. You can duck down by hitting down. Nothing really happens when you press up unless you're going up or a corridor or backwards in a corridor. There's also, of course, some sidestepping and some blocking as well. You can only progress from room to room or section to section once all the enemies on the screen have been defeated and completed. There's also hidden doors and, of course, hostages to rescue. There's also going to be other, say, shopkeepers or scientists that allow you to buy different weapons and some different power-ups, upgrading your weaponry. The system itself is amazing for its time, especially in 1990, as thanks to the Neo Geo 24-bit hardware, it had really large enemy graphics that scaled as they came in and out of the background into the foreground. You do have a pistol, a knife, and some physical attacks. The knife will degrade and eventually break, and the pistol itself has very limited ammo, and it's used for, say, one person at a time. That said, you can, as I mentioned with the store, actually purchase a machine gun, which can clear most enemies in a room, depending, of course, on the different types of enemies. The enemies themselves are basically palette swaps, which, of course, the ones with different colors pretty much just do either a bit more damage or able to take a bit more damage. They're mainly ski masked men, a couple of ninjas, gunmen here and there. There are, of course, sub-bosses as well, which include some scientists, a couple of unique characters that you face. The role itself in the game was fairly well received. I mean, I remember back in 1990, I mean, you got to realize being able to see from a first-person perspective, especially with this large of a characters, this was definitely way before a Wolfenstein or a Doom, especially way before Quake. So it was quite impressive to see this in the arcade and actually being able to control it. After being in the arcades and the home Neo Geo AES and Neo Geo CD systems, it was eventually re-released onto the Wii Virtual Console in 2012, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2018, also including the Nintendo Switch. Also released on the Neo Geo Mini in December of 2018, along with the Neo Geo Arcade Stick Pro in 2020. Again, this game is a pretty fun title. You can pick it up now physically, of course. Again, as I mentioned in past Neo Geo AES systems, if you are going to pick it up, I do recommend picking it up from Japan because they're usually pretty complete and in good condition. Right now, price ranges anywhere from, I would say, about $130 loose to as high as possibly $400 to $430 new, possibly graded. Complete hovers right around say 180 to possibly even $200. As far as being able. As far as the physical price for AES, unless you're a completionist or really have to have this title because you're a huge fan, I honestly can't see myself spending $200 to $400 to get this physically at these days prices. Back when before the whole retro game kind of blew up as far as collecting physically, you could have at least had this game anywhere between about 90 to almost 180 and almost mint condition. So that is a little tougher piece. That said, you can pick it up digitally, of course, as on the consoles that I mentioned earlier. But though even at $7.99, I honestly don't think it's kind of worth that price. I would recommend it more like a $3.99 price range, or if you got it as part of the Neo Geo Mini Stick, or any of the Neo Geo Minis, that might be another good way to play this game if you didn't want to download and pay for it digitally. The game itself, I do kind of give it a pass in regards to overall how the game is. It is fairly unique. There aren't really that many arcade games that combine a beat 'em up, a little bit of a shooter, going from a first person perspective. So, in that respect, the list is very short. That said, for this being one of the first ones, I'm giving it more of a 7 out of 10. Again, mainly it's because really thinking back at the respective time of release, the graphics were really good considering how big the sprites were, especially seeing it on the arcade screen. As far as gameplay, it is pretty limited. So that's really more out of, goodness, probably a 5 out of 10. Even looking back with rose tinted glasses, definitely a quarter muncher because some of the enemies, especially the sub bosses, do a lot more damage, and sometimes the hit kind of collision or detection isn't quite as tight as I think it needs to be. The overall sound effects are decent. They definitely work. There's nothing completely outstanding. The music works for the type of game that it is, but unfortunately for me, nothing really stands out that, this is not for me a type of game that I really needed to listen as far as when it comes to the music or would buy a soundtrack to. Again, as I mentioned, physically, if I hadn't already picked up this game years ago, I honestly could not recommend a physical copy unless you're a huge fan of the game or you're trying to complete your Neo Geo collection, whether that be AES or MVS. Of course, the MVS is a lot cheaper to collect for. But you don't get all the bells and whistles, like, say, a decent box, manual, etc. That said, as a trip down memory lane, if you can find it on a sale or a deal on any of the digital stores, whether that be the Switch, the Xbox, or the PlayStation for at least $4, I think it's definitely worth it since the genre, this type of game is pretty limited as far as the amount of games that are like it. So the nice part is you're able to pick up a game that is pretty unique, even for its time. Um, or you can pick it up on the Neo Geo Mini, as I said, or the Neo Geo Stick. So either any of those options would definitely be a worthy addition. I did pick it up, of course, physically many years ago, and have picked it up digitally for the Switch because I still like to have all of my retro titles on the go, especially with a large enough SD card. So as I mentioned and promised, this is just a short overview for a pretty great title back in the day. Again, released in 1990, not as extensive gameplay wise, but still a fun romp to go down memory lane and to be able to still play this title. So hope you guys enjoy. Please like, comment, and subscribe.